5 years ago, I sat in the parking lot of Apex Solutions in my beat-up sedan, a car that rattled every time I hit 40 miles per hour. The AC was broken, the leather was peeling, and I was sweating through the only professional blazer I owned. I remember staring at that glass and steel skyscraper until my eyes physically blurred. It looked like a fortress. A kingdom I wasn't allowed to enter. I had exactly $412 in my bank account. Rent was due in 3 days. And there, glowing on my phone screen, was a fresh email in my inbox that didn't just say no, it told me I lacked the DNA for their company. It was a rejection that felt like a funeral for my career. I sat in that car for 2 hours because I didn't have enough gas money to drive around and nowhere else to go. But yesterday, at 2 a.m., the same phone, newer model, same email address, buzzed on my nightstand. It was an email from Julian Thorne, the head of talent at that very same firm. The subject line didn't ask for an interview, it asked for a truce. They didn't just want me back, they were desperate. They were using words like indispensable and visionary. They wanted me to come home, completely forgetting that 5 years ago, they wouldn't even let me pass the lobby. They didn't realize that the girl they rejected died in that parking lot, and the woman they were emailing now was someone they couldn't afford. We've all had that one rejection that keeps us up at night. The one that feels like a stain on your soul. It's the one where you weren't just told you weren't right for the role, but you were made to feel fundamentally small. For me, that was Apex Solutions. I was jobless in a market that felt like it was crashing down around me, and I was terrified. Every morning I woke up with a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. Today, I'm taking you through the full circle. We are going to go deep into the anatomy of a comeback. We'll look at the moment Marcus Thorne looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't good enough, to the brutal 5-year grind where I had to build my own empire from the scraps they left me. We'll talk about the crawl back, the moment they realized their mistake and tried to buy my forgiveness. This isn't just a story about professional revenge. This is a story about why you should never let a no from a person who doesn't even know your middle name define your value. If you're in your own parking lot moment right now, this video is the sign you've been looking for. The original interview remains burned into my brain like a brand. I remember the smell of the lobby, expensive lilies and filtered air. I had spent my last bit of credit card debt on that blazer, hoping it would act as armor. I walked into Marcus's office on the 42nd floor. Marcus Thorne, the senior director of marketing, was a man who wore his ego like a designer cologne, overpowering and expensive. He didn't even look at my portfolio. It sat on his mahogany desk, unopened. He spent 20 minutes talking about prestige, legacy, and pedigree. He talked about Ivy League degrees and country clubs. When I finally found a gap in his monologue to show him my actual results, the 40% growth I'd driven at my last firm, he actually put his hand up to cut me off. "Passion is loud, Rose," he said with a smirk that made my skin crawl. "But at Apex, we value silence. We value a certain intellectual stamina that, frankly, isn't found in generalists. You're a hard worker, I can see that. But you don't have the Apex DNA. You're just not the right fit for our elite tier." He treated my unemployment like it was a contagious disease. He looked at my resume and didn't see a talent. He saw a person who was desperate, and in his world, desperation was a weakness to be exploited or discarded. I left that building feeling like a failure, walking past the polished granite walls, convinced that maybe he was right. Maybe I was just a girl in a cheap blazer trying to play a game I didn't understand. I was sobbing so hard in my car that I couldn't see the exit of the parking lot. My phone chimed. I expected it to be another "thank you for your interest" automated message. Instead, it was a private message on LinkedIn. It was from Sarah. Sarah was the junior recruiter who had been sitting in the corner of the room during my interview, taking notes. She hadn't said a word during the meeting. Her message read, "Rose, I'm sending this from my personal account because I shouldn't be saying this. For what it's worth, your strategy for the Q4 rollout was the best we've seen all month. Marcus isn't looking for a talent, he's looking for a mirror. He only hires people who remind him of himself. Please, don't let him get to you. You're going places." That tiny spark of validation from Sarah was the only thing that kept me from giving up. I was on the verge of moving back into my parents' basement and taking a job at a local retail store just to stop the bleeding. But Sarah saw me. She saw the value that Marcus was too arrogant to acknowledge because it didn't come with the right pedigree. That one message was the bridge that got me from despair to defiance. The next 2 years were the dark years. I didn't get a dream job the next week. I didn't get a win for a long time. I lived in a tiny studio apartment where the radiator hissed and the windows leaked. I worked 12-hour days for freelance clients who sometimes ghosted me on payments. I lived on ramen, cheap coffee, and the sheer, cold-blooded desire to never feel as small as Marcus made me feel again. This is where I met Leo. Leo was a mentor I found through a networking group, someone who had been chewed up and spat out by the corporate machine years prior. During the nights when I wanted to quit, when I had $3 in my account and a mountain of work, Leo was the one who reminded me of my why. They have the buildings, Rose. Leo would tell me over coffee we could barely afford. But you have the craft. They are leaning on their names. You are leaning on your skills. Eventually, their names won't be enough to fix their problems. That's when they'll have to come to you. While Marcus was sitting in his ivory tower, attending galas and talking about legacy, I was in the trenches. I mastered the new algorithms. I learned the technical data science side of marketing that Marcus thought was beneath a director. I built a name for myself under my own brand, one client at a time. I wasn't trying to prove them wrong anymore. I was busy becoming the version of myself that didn't need them. By year 4, the industry didn't just change, it flipped. The traditional marketing world that Marcus worshipped was crumbling. The big agencies were losing clients left and right because they couldn't adapt to the digital-first, data-heavy reality of the new economy. Companies didn't want prestige or pedigree anymore. They wanted ROI. They wanted someone who knew how to speak to a global audience through a screen, not just someone who looked good in a suit at a steakhouse. I started seeing the signs. I noticed Sarah had been promoted to a senior talent lead. She started liking my posts on LinkedIn, posts where I shared my case studies, my successful campaigns, and my thoughts on the future of the industry. She watched from the sidelines as I landed massive contracts with tech startups that Apex Solutions used to mock. I was no longer the jobless girl begging for a chance. I was an authority. I was being invited to speak at the same conferences where Marcus used to be the keynote speaker, only now, his seats were half empty, and mine was standing room only. Then came the 2 a.m. email. It was from Julian Thorne, the VP of Growth and Marcus's direct boss. The tone was night and day from the cold rejection of 5 years ago. There was no mention of DNA. No mention of intellectual stamina. The email was dripping with professional flattery. Julian mentioned my recent work with a major competitor. He talked about how Apex was undergoing a massive cultural and digital transformation and how they needed a visionary with my specific unconventional background to lead their new global department. He didn't mention my old application from 2021. He didn't mention Marcus's name once. He offered me a base salary that was 4 times what I had begged for in my initial interview. He offered a signing bonus that was more than my entire net worth during my jobless year. They were panicked. Their numbers were down, their talent was leaving, and they realized that the generalist they rejected was now the only specialist who could save their Q4. They thought a massive check could erase the memory of a girl crying in a broken sedan. I agreed to the meeting, not because I wanted the money, but because I wanted to see the look on Marcus's face. I walked back into that same glass and steel building. The lobby still smelled like lilies, but the fortress felt smaller this time. The security guard didn't ask me to wait on the bench. He recognized my name, handed me a VIP badge, and escorted me to the private elevator. I sat in the executive boardroom, the big one, the one with the view of the whole city. In walked Julian, and trailing behind him, looking like he had aged 10 years in 5, was Marcus. He looked tired. He looked like a man who was watching his world disappear. Julian spent 30 minutes pitching me on why Apex was the right move for my career. He talked about their new direction. Then he leaned forward and asked, "Rose, what will it take to get you on board? Name your terms." I waited. I let the silence hang in the air until it was uncomfortable. Then I looked directly at Marcus. "I'm curious, Julian," I said, my voice calm and steady. Does the company still prioritize intellectual stamina and DNA over actual technical results? Because 5 years ago, Marcus told me I didn't have the DNA to even be a specialist here. I'm wondering, did your DNA change, or are you just out of options? The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Marcus turned a deep, bruised shade of red. He wouldn't look at me, he just stared at his legal pad, his knuckles white as he gripped his pen. Julian looked from me to Marcus, the realization dawning on him that his star candidate had a history with his failing director, a history that was about to cost him the hire. Sarah, who was now a key part of the leadership team, was sitting at the end of the table. She didn't say a word, but she gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. A "you did it" look. In that moment, the power didn't come from the salary offer. It didn't come from the fancy room. It came from the realization that I didn't want the job. Even with the title, the prestige, and the money, the culture that allowed a man like Marcus to treat a struggling human being like trash hadn't actually changed. They hadn't evolved. They were just desperate. They didn't value Rose. They valued the fire I had built while they were busy trying to put mine out. If I joined them, I'd be pouring my fire into their dying hearth. I turned them down. I thanked Julian for the generous offer, told Marcus I hoped he found the DNA he was looking for, and I walked out. I walked past the granite walls, past the lilies, and out into the sunlight. For the second time in 5 years, I stood in that parking lot. But this time, I wasn't crying. I was laughing. I realized that my jobless period wasn't a hole I had fallen into. It was the foundation I had built. If they had hired me back then, I would have become just another cog in their broken machine. Their rejection was the greatest gift they ever gave me. To anyone watching this who is currently in their parking lot moment, keep building. When you feel invisible, when you feel small, when the Marcus in your life tells you that you aren't enough, use that as fuel. The people who reject you today are often the same people who will try to claim credit for your success tomorrow. Your value is not a variable that depends on a hiring manager's opinion. It is a constant that you prove every day you refuse to quit. 5 years can change everything. Make sure that when the story circles back, you're the one holding the pen.